All right, so Anthropic, the makers of the very popular Claude AI model, put out a threat intel report, that's what they're calling it, about how this is the first time that they've seen and stopped some powerful nation-state hackers from using an army of AI agents powered by Claude to hack into about 30 victims. But the cybersecurity community has taken a look at this report, myself included, and we're scratching our heads. I spent a lot of time reading threat intelligence reports as part of this. And I can tell you that this report has some pretty giant gaps in what you would expect from an intelligence report in terms of, intelligence, actionable intelligence, things that us as defenders could actually put into practice and spot these types of attacks in our systems. They're missing. Which then has a lot of people questioning, was all of this a marketing ploy? I've been hesitant to beat up on Anthropic too much on this topic because if this really happened, I do appreciate the transparency, because ultimately this is a failure of their system and their system's guardrails that allowed these threat actors to use Claude Code in a way that is so far beyond what it was designed for and what it does specifically have guardrails in place to try to stop. Those failed here. And they're admitting that through this report, and they're saying that they're improving them. So I want to applaud that transparency if that's the case. But at the same time, there's a lot of things missing here that, the cybersecurity community would expect from something called a threat intelligence report. And there's one thing at the very end of this report that makes you question the whole rest of it. And we'll get to that in a sec. So I want to go through the report together, right? What they're calling out happened. And then we've got some articles that have been written that we can read. But first, right off the bat, disrupting the first reported AI orchestrated cyber espionage campaign. They're calling it a cyber espionage campaign, but they're not providing a whole lot of evidence that this was espionage, right? They do call out some specific vulnerabilities and attacks, and we'll get to that, but not necessarily about espionage. I'm recording this November 19th. It came out last week. They did update it, probably due to some of the criticism about what makes them think the certain nation state that they call out, spoiler, China, was behind this. So let's read the executive summary a little bit, especially where they say they might have updated it. So this report details a recent threat campaign we identified and disrupted. This represents the work of Threat Intelligence, a dedicated team at Anthropic that investigates real-world cases of misuse and works with our Safeguards organization to improve our defenses against such cases. Really great. I'm sure that there is a very talented threat intelligence team at Anthropic. They are paying top dollar. If you're looking for a job, they're paying top of market. So I'm sure that they are attracting top threat intelligence talent. But you'll see as we go through this report, we're not seeing a lot of things that we would normally see out of Microsoft or Palo Alto Networks, Unit 42, things like that, when they put out threat intelligence reports. Let me zoom in a little bit for you. So they're saying that the attack happened back in September, a few months ago. Of course, it's highly sophisticated. We assess with high confidence that it was conducted by a Chinese state-sponsored group. Okay, I'm sure that they have good indicators that say that. We're designating it GTG 1002. I immediately was just upset that we have yet another naming convention that Anthropic is using here. I really wish that there was a way that we could have figured out how to use one of the standard naming conventions out of some of the other cybersecurity teams who track these groups, or even the government naming conventions, but instead we have another acronym to track. So those of you in threat intel, I'm sure you're going to start seeing this GTG naming convention pop up in other reports as we are forced to keep track of which group and their overlaps in other groups. So the big, take home of this whole report is that this is a giant shift in the use of AI for threat actors. I've covered Anthropic's past reports in videos. I've covered Google talking about threat actors' usage of AI. It's all boiled down to basically they're using AI in the same way that all of us in corporate America or in the corporate West are using AI for research or for documentation or for writing emails, whether they're social engineering emails or what. Just using ChatGPT or Claude just as the chat interface, not really in this super AI powered malware or agentic campaign. And this report is saying this is a shift. We now have seen a sophisticated AI agent, basically army, coming together to do most of the hacking here. They're saying, okay, they mapped the activity over 10 days. We've banned the accounts, notified entities that we saw that were targeted, coordinated with authorities, gathered actionable intelligence. Where's the intelligence? It's not in this report. And then here's where it starts to smell a little fishy. It's going to smell fishier at the very end of this, but Here, you can get a little taste of it. The campaign demonstrated unprecedented integration and autonomy of AI throughout the attack lifecycle, with the threat actor manipulating Claude code to support reconnaissance vulnerability. It's like, look at all the things that Claude code was capable of. The human operator tasked with instances of Claude code in groups of autonomous penetration testing orchestrators and agents. The threat actor was able to leverage AI to execute 80 to 90% of tactical operations. Look how good Claude code is. Doesn't this read a little bit more like marketing than intelligence, right? This could be accurate. This could be completely accurate, and it still smells a little funny given the context. They're calling it vibe hacking. Some people hate the term. I don't care. I'm fine. I like it. It's a colloquialism that we all understand at this point. I used to make fun of people that said cybersecurity. It was InfoSec. Cybersecurity was what like the news said. I've given in to the colloquialisms. I think vibe hacking is going to go the same way for me. And before we get to the rest of this report, just a quick word from today's sponsor. I've been talking a lot about browser security, extension security. It's a hot topic. It's a hard problem to solve. It's a problem I had to solve at my last day job. So I'm excited to tell you about the sponsor of today's video, Island. It's a browser designed for the enterprise. So all the features and control that you wish you had over your employee's browser, Island has baked in without any extra add-ons, tools, anything like that. So here we can take a look at some of the features. I'll get my face out of the way. We're talking about detecting and preventing phishing and even data leakage with copy and paste. Let's see how that works in action. So here's a phishing page pretending to be some bank. One of your employees goes to log in, Island detects it's not the real page and says, hey, this is an unknown site. You actually warn the user and they'll cancel their login. Or say you want to block websites that some of your employees might want to visit on their corporate laptop. Well, you can just roll that policy right out in the browser. Or say you want to prevent copying and pasting sensitive data out of something like Salesforce into some personal app. Well, that can be baked right into the browser too. Watch, they go to paste it, paste disabled. Or say you want to allow them to go to certain sites, but only in the controlled Island browser environment. So someone clicks a Salesforce link, it says, hey, this app is only accessible in the enterprise browser. One of the coolest features I thought was data masking. So here you can see an example of credit card details that are actually masked. And the user would actually click and request why they need to see them on their screen. Or say you didn't want someone to download sensitive files to their local disk and worry about data leakage. Well, here's a sensitive PDF download. You can give them the option to download to secure cloud Island storage. Right there in the browser. I am just touching the tip of the iceberg. I got a demo of Island. I can't even describe to you how many features are under the hood. They even have a terminal that you can enforce guardrails and policies in an SSH terminal built into the browser. This would have been super cool for me to have as part of a security team that was chasing around approving browser extensions or even just getting people to keep their browsers up to date, never mind all the features that I just showed you. Thanks, Island, for supporting the channel. I really appreciate it. Go check them out. Tell them I sent you. They'll take special care of you, and it's the best way to support this channel. Let's get back to the video. All right, some other important notes from the executive summary. They do call out where Claude failed in this, hallucinating during the penetration test. I think any of us that have used AI could probably understand what's going on here, but Claude frequently overstated its findings, occasionally fabricated data during some autonomous operations, claiming to have obtained credentials that didn't work or identifying critical discoveries that proved to be publicly available information. So again, kudos to the transparency on where Claude failed in guardrails and hallucination here. All right, let's get into the actual attack. So right off the bat, they say that the attacker made heavy use of MCP tools. If you're unfamiliar, Model Context Protocol. It's a little complex to actually educate in this video what MCP is if you don't know it, but basically they're using external tools with AI as the orchestrator to use these other tools. And then they use this fleet of MCP tools as Claude as the orchestrator to attack web apps, databases, internal networks, cloud infrastructure, and even appliances. Some of the MCP tools that they said they used were vuln scanners, credential validation. It seems like the MCP tools that they used were heavily around browser use. There's something called browser MCP, but it also said that they were using things like vuln scanning tools that had MCP. They didn't specify which ones, but okay, nothing too surprising there. But again, we get into a whole section about how good Claude is at doing 80 to 90% of the work here. I don't know if this is like a warning to cybersecurity people or just like I said, it kind of feels like marketing, this whole section, right? It's like, hey, humans really only have to do the final 10 to 20% of total effort. And the operational tempo achieved is just something that humans alone could not do, right? This is autonomous model rather than interactive assistance. I do have a lot of AI power user friends, and this AI agent kind of army to do certain tasks is definitely real, right? There is like a force multiplier here. Go look at what like Daniel Miessler has been able to achieve with Claude Code as like his personal assistant and running different agents. So much so that he's given each of them a different voice through 11 Labs so that they can say out loud when they're done, and he knows which agent it was that finished what. That's like how many simultaneous operations he's got going on in some of his stuff. So I know that like this isn't all fluff. There is some serious capabilities that we're talking about here. I'm a power user myself, obviously to a lower degree as nation states or even like my friend Daniel, but I've seen what this stuff can do, and it's serious. Here's the image that if you guys have been following this, you've probably seen this image all over social media now. It's like the multi-phased attack of the agents. So again, these are the MCP tools that were part of like the first phases of it. Basically, reconnaissance. So there's a scan tool, a search tool, a data retrieval tool, and a code analysis tool. Nothing too surprising here. Maybe a little bit surprising that the guardrail bypasses were able to work to do all of this. But the way that they call it out, they say that the agents were put on such small isolated tasks that if you looked at them in isolation, they looked fine. And it was only through the persistent action of this one, group of actors doing all of this that they were able to paint the bigger picture. Okay, I can believe that. This diagram, pretty basic though. Intel gathering, then we have vulnerability analysis. So recon, vuln scanning, going into an exploitation tool. That'll actually try to do the exploits. And then, okay, what do you do once there is an exploit? Well, you do some internal recon beyond, that first set of credentials, and you see what sort of data you can exfiltrate. And again, kind of surprising that data exfiltration was achieved through AI guardrails also. But based on that information, jumping back to the executive summary really quick, they said that the operation targeted 30 entities and their investigation validated a handful of successful intrusions. So they're probably validating successful intrusions by looking at this and saying, hey, we're seeing Claude orchestrate some data exfiltration, which wouldn't have happened unless the earlier phases were successful. All right, again, here's where the threat intel report starts to feel a lot like marketing again. So in each phase of that diagram, they have a section that outlines what's going on. Here they talk a lot about how the attackers had to literally, they call it social engineer of the AI model. I really don't like this like personification of AI models. It's like, oh, they had to trick the model. The model had guardrails, they bypassed the guardrails. One of the ways that they did this was they claimed that they were employees of a legitimate cybersecurity firm that convinced Claude that it was being used in defensive cybersecurity testing. So they just said, yeah, okay, do all the vuln scanning you want if it's for yourself and you have permission. But each one of these sections has a highlight that talks about AI's role in the success of that section. So it's like, I kind of read this and go, look at what Claude was able to do during this phase. There was minimal direct involvement during this phase. Claude was great. So now we've bypassed the guardrails. I guess that was phase one. Phase two is actually recon and attack surface management. So we have the browser automation via MCP. So I'm guessing this is browser MCP if you guys have used it. That's actually the name of the MCP tool. So they have Claude using a browser via an MCP server to basically go through a target's website and do recon about all the endpoints. I'm guessing finding different API endpoints, finding whatever it is. And then again, we have AI's role in this section. Well, Claude was able to do autonomous attack surface mapping, service discovery, vulnerability identification. Look at all the things that Claude was able to do. Now we get like full-on tables saying Claude's role in this and then the human's role in this, and we get them timed. So we have vulnerability discovery and validation. This is obviously something that the guardrails should have 100% have caught at this point. But to their credit, they're saying, hey, when you looked at each of these attacks in isolation with the little bit of the social engineering of the AI model, we weren't able to say that this one particular thing was bad. But they're saying that Claude was able to actually look at these web apps and identify SSRF vulnerabilities. There are entire startups out there that are building like things like Expo and some of these other things that are building AI penetration testing tools to do these kinds of things. And these attackers were able to get Claude code to do it out of the box. And the theme here on all of these tables for the next couple of sequences is look at all the stuff on the Claude side, and then look how little we actually have on the human side. Again, look at all the cool stuff that Claude could do. And the human just had to approve. the exploitation. AI's role: autonomous vulnerability discovery, payload generation, exploitation validation, human authorization required only at escalation to the active exploitation phase. Phase 4, credential harvesting and lateral movement. Claude independently determined which credentials provided access to which services, mapping privilege levels, access boundaries without human direction. Lateral movement proceeded through AI-directed enumeration of accessible systems using those stolen credentials. Claude systematically tested authentication against internal APIs, database systems, container registries, logging infrastructure, building comprehensive maps of internal networks and architectural access relationships. AI's role: look at all the cool things that Claude could do. Data collection: we've got another table filled with stuff in Claude's autonomous actions, and then the humans' actions are just in minutes, right? We're extracting password hashes and account details, identifying high-privileged accounts, creating a persistent backdoored user account, downloading complete results to the local system, parse, blah, 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 and then the human just has to review and approve. You see why we're all feeling a little fishy here, and we still haven't even gotten to the payoff, in my opinion, at the very end. And documentation and handoff, this is like kind of what people were using AI for already, right? Just like write a bunch of report stuff that we don't want to do. Talk about how sophisticated the attack is. I think you guys get the gist. And they get to their response, right? Hey, we did this full investigation. We wrote this report. We've notified authorities, and we've obviously updated our detection systems to detect these types of autonomous attacks. But here's the payoff. Here's where it just, the whole thing starts to smell to me. Hey, we've talked about vibe hacking before. We've warned you guys. This is like a, hold on. This is like a thing that I keep seeing Sam Altman, Anthropic, like stand up on their platform and say, look how dangerous the thing that we put out is. Just a weird thing to stand up and say is like, hey, the thing that we are responsible for building, guys, hey, watch out. It's dangerous. But okay, they said this summer, vibe hacking's here, but now human involvement is even less frequent. The attackers are catching up on AI's capabilities, building agents, using MCP tools. This is all new. So what's the answer? Well, this is the part of the report that you would normally expect to see: some IOCs, some IP addresses, the tools that were like the specific tools that were being used, those MCP servers. I want to be able to look out for the fingerprints of those MCP servers in everything that I'm doing. No. We don't get that section of the report. What do we get? We get that the answer, obviously, to how sophisticated these attackers are getting with our great tool Claude is to make it crucial for the cyber defense teams to use Claude themselves in order to meet the crazy sophistication of the attackers. When sophisticated cyber attacks inevitably occur, our goal is for Claude, into which we've built strong safeguards, which were all bypassed as evidence for the last 13 pages. We want to assist cybersecurity professionals to detect, disrupt, and prepare for future versions of the attack. So you must become our customers as well as the threat actors that we are catching. We are definitely catching. Guys, if I sound cynical, trust your instincts. I'm not alone. There's reports coming out that a lot of people in the cybersecurity community are saying, Dan Gooden over at ours, he's a legit one. If you guys want to follow a specific journalist, Dan's a good one to follow. He much more succinctly sums up kind of what we've been talking about and then gets in. I mean, that's a cool quote. Let's see what the context of that quote is. Ass kissing, stonewalling, and acid trips. So this is a quote from Dan Tentler. If you don't know Dan, he's a experienced pen tester, spoken at DEF CON Black Hat a number of times. I know Dan. He says, I refuse to believe that attackers are somehow able to get these models to jump through hoops that nobody else can. Why do the models give the attackers what they want 90% of the time, but the rest of us have to deal with ass-kissing, stonewalling, and acid trips? He's talking about that whole like social engineering the model to do what you want to do, hitting those guardrails, or the hallucinations is what I'm guessing he's calling acid trips. I kind of liked that little quote. They kind of question some of the numbers in this article. They say, hey, if they targeted 30 organizations and only a small number of those attacks succeeded, that raises the question, assuming so much human interaction was eliminated from the process, what good is that if the success rate is so low? I don't know. I mean, they said this was only a 10-day campaign that they monitored, and, so I don't know if that's so low. Depending on the targets, they said chemical plants, government organizations. Dan reached out to Kevin Beaumont, who I think I talked about in my last video here. So Kevin just keeps making appearances on my channel, but Gossy the dog saying, hey, the threat actors aren't inventing anything new here. And kind of his finishing touch, he talked about this article actually last week that I included in my newsletter. If you're not subscribed, do so below, about AI developed malware and Google calling it out that it really kind of sucks. AI developed malware just doesn't work. And I like his sign off. There's no reason to doubt that AI assisted cybersecurity may one day produce more potent attacks, but the data so far indicates that threat actors, like most others using AI, are seeing mixed results that aren't nearly as impressive as those in the AI industry claim. That other article he mentioned there is this one by Google saying that, hey, 5 AI developed malware families failed to work and are easily detected. So I don't know. It took me a few days to make the long version of this video. I made the short version. Kind of wasn't as critical of Anthropic in the short version, but I've been sleeping on it. And it just bothers me that, especially once the cybersecurity comes out and says all the things that we've been saying on social media for the past few days about, hey, where are the things that you would normally see in a threat intelligence report, like IOCs and anything that we could go off of here? The response, I mean, you saw that note, executive summary updated, of why we believe that it was Chinese threat actors. I didn't see anything in that executive summary that I would normally see in terms of attribution or any sort of actual actionable intelligence that we cybersecurity professionals could put into our systems to help detect these very sophisticated, oh my gosh, look how much more they were able to do as hackers because the humans just didn't need to be involved at all. You would think they would say, hey, look for these kinds of things and behaviors to in your detection systems, in your SIMs, in your SOCs. But we didn't get any of that. We got, look how cool Claude was, and then the sign off, which kind of just really, for me, I'm not one of these AI haters, right? I think AI agents are super powerful. I think there's some really, really interesting startups coming out that are using AI agents to do a lot of things that are really challenging in the cybersecurity industry. I'm really interested in some of the AI agent pen testing companies out there and their successes as this stuff starts to develop. And I still look at that last page and it says, well, as you can see from the previous 12 pages, AI cyber threats are here, and the only thing that you can do to stop it is become a Claude customer yourself and integrate it into your cyber defenses. That cheapens the previous 12 pages for me, and I slept on it for a few days, and here I am making the video. What do you guys think? I don't think that they're lying, okay? I think that this went down. I think it went down exactly how they're saying it went. So what do you guys think? You think there's more of a marketing piece? Did you appreciate this intel and the transparency from Anthropic on where their guardrails failed? Or do you think they're overstating the sophistication of the attacks to come to try to sell more API keys? Let me know what you think below. Share this with someone who you might think this was interesting if they work in a SOC, or if any of you, work in AI and security. Really would be glad to have you along as a subscriber. You know the drill. All those buttons below help the channel. Subscribe to the newsletter. Check out the sponsor. It's the best way to support what I do. I appreciate it. Follow for more cybersecurity news.